I feel like we're in this time of needing to fix people. Well, we're not broken. None of us are broken. We're just really wanting to be that of care for one another because, like, often behind anger is often fear. So it's just a matter of presence.
Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education Podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. On today's Classroom Narratives episode, I'm joined by Kathryn Pannepacker, a textile and community-engaged artist whose work explores how art making, listening, and relationship building intersect within community spaces. And Kathryn is a contributor to the anthology Art as Restorative Practice, which has been edited by Lisa Kay and Bev Johns, both wonderful guests here on the show. We'll link their episodes in our show notes as well. And I reached out to Kathryn because her chapter is titled Community Healing Through Intentional Listening. And that one phrase alone raised a lot of important questions for me, particularly in what it means to think about listening, not just as a skill, but also as a practice that can help shape our community experiences. So, through projects like the Listening Loom and her broader community-based work, Kathryn invites us to reflect about how we ask questions, how we listen, and how such actions might influence belonging, care, and connection across settings. So, Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us today in terms of how we approach communities and the role that art has in those different types of relationships.
Joey, thank you. It's really a delight to be here with you. I appreciate the welcome. Yeah, thank you for the welcome. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a special shout out to Lisa Kay as well for also continuing to bridge our connections. We always love being 3 degrees of separation, as we say.
It truly is. Yeah, I also wanted to give a shout out to my collaborator on the project, Tishka K. Smith, yeah, who wrote the article, the introduction about our project that we'll talk about, the Listening Loom that I created years ago. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that might be a good place to start. Well, we'll do that second. My first question is, so as I was just mentioning to Kathryn, that I am a writing professor. And as a writing professor, and working in the humanities space has us think all the time about how to invite students' emotions into their practices in ways that are both safe and meaningful. And as a writing professor, whenever I get a piece of writing that I feel is trying to speak to me beyond the academic requirement of that, I'll pull the student aside and I'll say, hey, I see what you've offered me through your writing. And I just want you to know that I'm present and I'm listening. So, again, one of the reasons why I became in touch with Kathryn is because I realized that the title of your article, your contribution, is Community Healing Through Intentional Listening. And remember that the anthology itself is about restorative practices. So, for our listeners who are focusing on this idea, perhaps for the first time, either rather they're educators, maybe they could be artists or even caregivers, what does that actually mean? Community healing through intentional listening. What does that mean in practice? And what does make listening to be intentional and even, as you indicate, to be healing for some?
Hmm. Gosh, great question. Thank you. Sort of the silent pause, right?
Yeah.
I think like intentional listening is really just presence. It's noticing, it's looking, it's observing, it's having the opportunity to just connect with someone, to look at someone, to ask questions,
Yeah.
and not just think about what we're going to say next, to sort of probe deeper, to care.
Mhm.
These kinds of little opportunities of how are you doing? What do you need? Such that the listening loom does is often just a moment of slowing the pace down and touching base with the moment. I think
Yeah.
of the word moment in the other word momentum and how momentum is really moment by moment. And I think of that word momentum, it's like tummy, gut,
Yeah.
intuition. heart core. So, how can we ourselves really take on a practice personally of being so present in our spirit, our heart, to be with another person?
Yeah.
So, in the classroom, I see this a lot across the table around the studio with folks that I engage with that might be in active addiction or that are unsheltered, or seniors that I've engaged with that are often just parked in front of a TV set. How can we step back? Not step back physically so much. Sometimes it needs that, but just really sort of step back from ourselves and then step forward. How can we lean in to listen, to probe in a gentle way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And as part of the work that you've done with intentional listening, we've also had some time in our pre-chat to speak about the listening loom, and that has been a major and also, I'll even say, a neutral anchor and connector that
Yeah.
has existed in the art space. So tell us, for our listeners, starting from scratch, if you will, a little bit about the listening loom and some of what has emerged in translating listening to something that has been tactical and visual in a way that lets people be heard.
Sure. Yeah. I guess, a lot of times how projects come over me are just like these aha moments or like these sort of like angel inspired moments. So I think I was literally like all of us, like in the middle of lockdown with COVID many years ago, not that many years ago, but feeling really disconnected and aware that we're all feeling really disconnected. And I wanted to get outside with myself and just connect with folks. So protests were happening with George Floyd and then COVID and the economy was going through. It was just like a whirlwind of stuff. So I literally brought my standing loom, which is not more than, I don't know, 4 feet tall or such, with uh, I warped it up with some string and yarns and such. I'm a weaver in my studio. I weave, I paint, I do all sorts of art practices, but primarily I'm a weaver, an artist and an uplifter. Let me just say it like that is how I like to
Yes.
think of myself, because I also paint. But with the listening loom, so I brought up my loom, which is kind of a curious thing anyway, right? Like, what the heck is a loom doing, at a busy
Yeah.
intersection in Germantown, which is a neighborhood of Philadelphia? Buses coming and going. So the listening room is really a loom and two stools and myself. And something else we can talk about, which is the healing blanket, which is,
Hmm.
a blanket that my mom knit. That particular iteration was the healing blanket. It is a blanket that my mom knit. And anyway, so it's creating like a little corner of the world of sanctuary. That's really what it is in the busyness of life. How to create a Zen space, sanctuary studio. There's so much chaos and turbulence and overwhelm and rush and hecticness and pressure and urgency, right? That I just feel like my initial desire was to set up my loom in the thick of that and in the center of that and just give it a whirl. And so that's what I did.
Hmm.
I loaded my loom and the two stools and such on a tricycle that I zip around on from time to time. And then I set up the loom. And the listening loom is just like creating sanctuary, creating studio, creating a little zone. And I ask two simple questions. How are you doing?
Hmm.
And what do you need? And so that has taken on all sorts of iterations, whether it was how it started with being in Germantown with folks coming and going with the overwhelm of COVID and getting back into life and such, asking those questions. And what I found was people were, like I was already saying, overwhelmed and tired and exhausted, but also like ready to get back to it and wanting to engage and wanting to connect. And but how? And then what do you need? It was like this vortex moment of gentleness, maybe
Yeah.
quietness, welcome. I had like a little basket that I would have on the ground there with next to the stools if someone didn't have time to sit down at the stool and engage with me and watch me weave it as we were talking. Sometimes it would just be like handing them a little laminated card, for example, that might say something simple like listen to the birds sing or
Mm.
be your awesome self or it's okay. It's really okay. Be gentle with yourself. I'll tell you about having the opportunity with my colleague Tishka Smith. And when the war broke out in Ukraine, it was like, dear God, what can we do? So my colleague and I, we set up a thought and idea to find a neighborhood in the far northeast in Philadelphia, Somerton neighborhood, where there's many refugees and immigrants and folks that have been displaced from the war that are in the far northeast. And we wanted to set up the Listening Loom there and connect with the community, connect with the neighborhood. It was a perfect location. We had the support to figure out where to set it up. So through networks for training and development and others, we were able to find this school right in this neighborhood where there were these beautiful families with all sorts of culture and uniqueness with music and food and art and culture, and then set up a whole studio to have creative connection and play opportunities for the children to draw and color patterns of Ukrainian textiles, to
Mhm.
do weaving with chalk on the pavement. We had sunflowers that were the color of the Ukrainian flower. We had a map up there on the fence where folks could like pin in the area where they were from. In that particular neighborhood, there was, folks from all over the world, particularly Ukraine, Moldova, Yugoslavia, Russia. I mean, such conflict, such intensity, such conversations that we were having with folks. So it's like how to create an environment of welcome when there's a lot of confusion and tension and sadness. So by having the loom there, by having the two stools and the welcome for sometimes it was the kids or the teenagers. Sometimes it was the parents that would come by after they dropped off their kids. They would circle back around. They would recognize the colors of the flag of Ukraine, and they would just want to sit and talk. Just real heart-to-heart conversations with folks of how are you doing, and then what do you need? Joey, what we found is that folks really welcomed being listened to. Sometimes we didn't understand. We had a translator there, so we had just for folks to have someone listening next to me that understood what they were saying if they couldn't speak in English. But when Tishka was taking these beautiful photographs of all the activities that we were doing, we had other gatherings of music and another celebration of our project up there, of having food that was recognizable to the families. And well, one of the things that we found was folks really wanted some support. They wanted to learn more English. They were feeling overwhelmed with how to get in touch with people. So the Listening Loom was that neutral spot that could be a connector for folks.
And this was all done, by the way, for our listeners in Philadelphia in the USA as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I love that you mentioned that word connector, especially through the projects that you've done, because my next question, and as a natural transition as well, was how are you working to navigate, we can even say that tension between trying to show up authentically for a community and also heal your own boundaries as the facilitator as well when you're taking the stories and trying to find ways to not internalize those from people around you. So, as a community healer like yourself, how do you focus on sustainable care in this line of work? And how does continuing to network and build connections matter? How do you engage with that?
Mm, huge question.
With
Really
many
good question.
parts. Yes.
And really poignant for the times too. I'd like to keep this real personal. It's really important for all of us as uplifters and educators and connectors, as artists. It's an inside job. It's like, how do we take care of
Mhm.
ourselves so that we can be present with others when we have those opportunities to be present with others? So, like for the last 9 years, I've been working front lines, doing art as harm reduction with folks in active addiction, folks that are unsheltered, and things that we were talking about. It's like how ways of connecting. I just feel so raw with emotion with all this
Please,
because
yeah.
you feel like you're doing your absolute damnedest to care for folks. And we are in broken systems, right?
Mhm.
So the education system is crumbling, and we're all doing our best to connect with people that we engage with. Our social systems are broken. The revolving door of the jail system and recovery system and addiction and support and mental health. And, there's just like, there's so many systems that are sort of unraveling right now.
Yeah.
And how can we be such a part of it as we are engaged, doing our best to create a sense of belonging and connection and purpose and meaning? How do we keep care of ourselves so that we can bring our full selves to those situations where we can, like as you were saying with your student with the writing, you can read something really intently and then step back from it and pause and then go back in and connect with that student and even just recognize, like, I read what you wrote. Do you want to share more about it? So like around the table, for example, these like sanctuary studios of art is harm reduction with my other colleague, Lisa Kelly. It's like, building connections with folks and really observing and listening and watching. So it's like I might see someone sitting at a table and that their hands need wound care, for example,
Yeah.
or they're in need of clean socks or whatever it be, that we're not desensitized, that we are
Right.
completely present and that we are giving those moments to really observe and watch and then be a connector to the services best we can. Because of the intensity sometimes of it all, we have to really do our own inner work also, always, often,
Yeah.
and take a pivot and take a pause, and that's what I'm intentionally doing right now. Just sort of just taking care of myself.
I was
Yeah.
telling Catherine that right before we signed on to our call, that I was having another conversation with another organization that's really focused on the whole landscape of wellness and healing and trying to implement that work into schools. And I asked them, I said, what are some of the pain points that you see our communities dealing with right now? And what they mentioned, as you as well, Catherine, is that the whole system of education is struggling because, and it's something that I visualize easily, unfortunately, rightly so, because I'm from Parkland. But the way that it was articulated to me was in the way that I haven't thought about for quite some time. The education system has morphed from something that was so noble just a couple decades ago to now a living, breathing institution that's working 24/7 to keep children alive. That's what was told to me, that same verbiage, to keep children alive, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
And that is extremely daunting work to think about, even again, as somebody from Parkland who lost their friend to suicide just thereafter, and making that my life's work through my scholarship. To hear that articulated was difficult to hear from
Yeah.
somebody else as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And even as an educator, I personally feel uncomfortable calling myself a quote unquote community healer. And
Mm.
I've even walked into my classes and I've even said, listen, my writing class on trauma is not meant to heal anybody. Because if I make that promise to you and I fail to do that, I've broken the guarantee and I've left a lot of disappointment in the students who are in the class. So I really personally try to steer away from that and thinking that I'm capable in any way of healing a student. But what I do say is that this class practices trauma-informed writing. We practice skillful composition in a way that can help you think about your personal circumstances. And that is a guarantee that I can make that my class will allow students to think and feel at the same time. So for our educators who are listening, especially for those who might not be artists, but are still maybe in the humanities space, as we've been talking about as well, what are some different ways to bring this full circle? That intentional listening can exist in classrooms without having to add another initiative or a burden to the system that we already see as struggling to stand on its own 2 feet.
Mm. Gosh, I so resonate with what you said about, like, because I too, I don't identify myself at all as a healer,
Mm,
and I cringe when I hear people say, "Oh yeah, we helped save a person today from, X, Y,
mhm.
Z." It's like, oh gosh, it just like turns my
Because
stomach.
we're not saviors. We're caring people who are trying to do this work on our own. That's all we are.
Yeah, precisely like Joy, we're just recognizing people. Like you could be my brother, my sister, my mother, my aunt, uncle. We're just seeing one another, and
Hmm.
connecting with one another. So yeah, that's a really strong thing that I feel so strong. That really hits my heart is let us be uplifters and supporters. Let us be listeners. Let us be lovers to connect, to build places of purpose, of belonging, of meaning. Tools for listening, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of, like we were saying before, it's so much an inside job of just like really readying ourselves to be in the flow, the zen, the water of it all, just to really not bring any sort of resistance, but just curiosity, a beginner's mind to whatever the encounter is. To ask questions. I think we often are so locked into this place of thinking about what we're going to say to respond to what's being said to us. So rather just to really be comfortable with the pauses and creating that pause too, because it's easy to be affected by the energies of those that were around. So if there's an anxiety, a demand, an intensity, an insistence from those around us, perhaps our inclination would be the urgency of it. We got to do something. So, can we prepare ourselves when we walk into the classroom or when we walk into the sanctuary studio? Just our day, for example, getting on the bus. Can we just really take a pause and be with looking at people? Just taking the defense off and just taking the breath and taking the intensities down a notch and just being present with folks. Mhm.
Definitely. And you mentioned questioning as well. What are some different questions that classroom teachers can ask for the purposes of intentional listening in the classroom? What does this look like?
Yeah, well, I think those basic questions of how are you doing really
Hmm.
go a real long way. And not being fixed with what the answer might be, you know?
Sure.
I mean, to really be okay with lightheartedness or
Yeah.
with someone's over exaggerated humor, or how can we hold space for people's emotions? I mean, I feel like we're in this time of needing to fix people. Well, we're not broken. None of us are broken. We're just really wanting to be that of care for one another, because like often behind anger is often fear, so it's just a matter of presence. So what kind of questions might an educator ask if how you doing doesn't resonate? Just like, tell me two things that you did today that
Mhm.
you felt really good about, or tell me something that you're looking forward to, or opening up those kind of questions that don't have folks feel like they're under pressure to be right or get it, but just to recognize that you're a safe person to be around, that you're not judging them, that you're just wanting to connect. Yeah.
Absolutely. So just fostering genuine connections that help
Yeah.
bring people together,
Yeah.
even in different levels of authority between admin and teachers and students as well, to help make the institution breathe again on its own, if you will.
Yeah,
And
that's true. Like you were saying about all the different roles that we see in life, the
mhm,
admin, the educator, the professional artist, the studio artist, the crafter. I mean, there's just so many levels and layers and prerequisites that we have been taught or shown in society that gives us so much internal criticism and judgment. We're already hard enough on
yeah.
ourselves in society, right?
Hmm.
So you can imagine what our young people are feeling as they're walking into the classroom, walking into whatever the situation might be, like the insecurities, the pressures, the
Hmm.
comparisons, and such like that. So we just, best we can as educators and as human beings, we just want to figure out ways to appreciate and to connect and to find something to pivot to. I always give myself a couple minutes in the morning to bitch and moan because we got to keep it real. We got to keep it real, right? But we also want to figure out ways to pivot, to make little tweaks and adjustments. If we're in the throes of like an intense situation, to just pause. And then if we're outside, a lot of times, there's a bird somewhere chirping. Let me figure out where it is and listen. Right?
Yes.
There's some pattern on someone's piece of clothing around that's pretty cool, and let me look for something. So it's a muscle we have to practice
Hmm.
as human beings anymore. We really have to do very intentional listening, but also intentional practicing for the inner work, but also to ready ourselves for our day.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you talking about that regulation factor because I know that when our students are already dysregulated from their own outside forces, now they come into a classroom from a dysregulated teacher as well. And those two dysregulated humans are now like feeding off of each other in ways that are
Yeah,
not so positive to the learning environment. So there needs to be certainly ways for people to find grounding and regulation, regardless
yeah.
of what their outside circumstances look like, in order for one common space to function
Mhm.
as a whole denominator.
It's so true. I know sometimes it could be, like you're saying, just movement. I've had opportunities where it's just literally like shrugging our shoulders or moving our
Yeah,
bodies and just like not necessarily finding word or sound for things. Sometimes it's sound, but it's not like sensical sound or
right.
sensical, graceful movements, but it's just like expressive ways. I've got this tattoo. You can't really see it. The listeners can't see it, but I sort of took a page out of my colleague Lisa's book, and she had this tattoo, so I got one too. Meet people where they are.
Yes.
We want to meet people where they are, but like, how can we support people to then bring them to the next space, or to walk with them to the next space?
Mhm.
Space being, as metaphorical as we want. You follow
Right.
me? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, like I know that whenever we're about to have, like on Monday, we had a very heavy discussion a couple of days ago in our opening days of class, just trauma theory and what it means to look at books and be a witness to the very difficult stories of others. Like we are reading some memoirs from Columbine this semester, so we talk about what it's
Hmm.
like to be a witness to that
Yeah.
and some of the reactions we should look at within ourselves and our brains and our bodies. This is literature 101. It gets pretty deep. But
Wow.
before
Yeah.
I get into those conversations with the
Yeah.
students, I warn them and I say, hey, we're going to be talking about X, Y, and Z in a little bit. Before we let the information become overloading to us, let's go ahead and take 90 seconds and walk through a 5-finger meditation process. Now, guide them through that where they inhale, trace their fingers, and exhale through their full hands. And it allows them to have that momentarily sense to re-regulate before we all become facilitators on a common baseline through that day's content and curriculum.
Yeah, yeah, that's a beautiful example. It reminded me of a practice that I sometimes do with folks where they're a little hesitant to sit down and engage. So it could just be a matter of sitting next to them at the table and just like they doodle a line, then I'll doodle a
Yeah.
line, I'll doodle a line, you pick a color, I pick a color, and just like figuring out ways to like or this other person I'm thinking about, no art about it at all, no creativity about it at all. It was literally playing tic-tac-toe, but they sat down at the table because they felt it was a safe place to be.
Mhm.
Somebody was listening and somebody cared, and I think that's what we want as educators, as people, to just really create spaces for welcome. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Spaces for welcome is a great way to think about a theme for today's conversation as well. So, as we start to conclude, it's been so wonderful speaking together. And I wanted to ask, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners for them to take away with?
Yeah, thank you. I guess let it be okay for yourselves to hit the pause button sometimes. And that pause button looks like so many different things to all of us. Don't get too caught into ruts and routines. Be okay with stepping back, stepping within yourselves, and just
Yeah.
pausing and listening it, and to sort of bring it looped around to something that we were talking about earlier with that idea of like momentum. So the moment by moment, listening to your gut, your intuition, your tummy, momentum, like build up the momentum for if it's your own self-care, build up that momentum to remember yourself, realign yourself again with yourself to be that more awesome version of yourself for others, right? Not only for yourself, but for others. Yeah.
Thank you
Joey,
so much
thank
for
you.
that.
This has been so uplifting for me. Thank you.
I'm so delighted. Thank you so much, Catherine. And one final question, just one more.
Yeah.
Your website is going to be in our show notes. And when our listeners go to learn more about you, is there anything that you want them to see or know in advance, or anything that they can expect or go more into on their own?
Oh, geez, yeah. I'm in that betwixt between space, right? But I am always a weaver. I'm always a uplifter. Just finishing up a series of You Are Welcome Here. I saved a chair for you weavings. So you can look out for those weavings. Do a Google search for that. You are welcome here. I saved a chair for you. And it's that idea of just holding space for people. A lot of like our conversation, Joey, of just like holding space. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and all that. I'm always looking forward to connecting with folks. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathryn. So that was Kathryn Pannepacker. And what stays with me from this conversation is that how listening is a way to shape relationships and build possibility as well. And Kathryn's work has invited us to see listening as creative and ethical, which is a way that can help communities feel more whole, more connected, and more human as well, amid complexity and limitation. So if this conversation has resonated with you, I encourage you to explore Art as Restorative Practice from Lisa Kay and Bev Johns, as well as Kathryn's Listening Loom, to reflect on how listening shows up in your own classrooms, your own studios, or even your own spaces of leadership, not as something to master, but as something to practice with sincerity and care. So, Kathryn, thank you for your generosity today. Thank you for sharing your work with us. Thank you for your thinking and your presence as well.
Joey, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.